there have been some new additions in the latest version of After Effects, okay? And some of those we will not so much worry about, but know that they are there, okay? So let's just work with the basics and start to understand the structure of After Effects. So we open up the program, we open up the application. So from here, we'll save it, we'll put it. So I might just call this week 1 intro. Okay, I do version control, so it might be the first version of my week 1 intro. But put this into the folder as well. Treat it like you are doing a publication and InDesign, and all the content, all the assets are kept together, okay? So just be organised in that way. Now, having actually started the file, to actually begin, we deal with these things called compositions, or quite simply, we call them comps. Okay, so this is quite important that you understand that this space is the settings for whatever it is that you're creating, okay? And this can be edited, adjusted, reset, right up until the point that you're about to render the file. Okay, so we can always go back to this, but it's important to note that there are some presets that we use. By default, this HD 1920 or 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels, that's HD. That's the landscape rectangle of a television monitor, a computer monitor, whatever. It is the most used size that you would use for production design, okay? Television commercials, movie credits, we use that. Now, the frames per second is important as well. We can adjust it. This 29.97 is US frames per second, okay? It's quite awkward. 25 frames per second, which is the standard that we'll use, is Australian broadcast television standard. Okay, so 25 frames per second is a good default frames per second to use. 24 frames per second, that's actually cinema. Okay, fine to use. If all that you are creating is going to go up and be on YouTube or social media, you can use whatever frames per second you like. Okay, but it's good just to have a standard that you use. Now, if you were doing something like stories or TikTok, then you would invert that. You would make this 1080 and make this, unlock, 1080 by 1920. Okay. The square format that we used to use a lot in Instagram and things like that, I would just use 1200 by 1200, which is fine. But whatever format you're doing, this is the size you use. And of course, any of the assets that you create in something like Illustrator, use your artboards at the same size so that everything is ready to go in exactly the right space. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to 1920 by 1080, 25 frames per second. Let's just work with that. Funnily enough, because I also do 2D animation, like character animation and things like that, and I tend to be using 24 frames per second in that. Okay. If you wanted to know why 25 frames per second is a thing, is it goes back to the origins of the television, how images are made on a television screen. And so with cinema, you had a strip of film, individual images. It would come down in front of a projector, be projected onto a wall. A shutter would come down. The next frame would move into space. Shutter would open, projected, shutter down. Next one. 24 times per second. Okay, much faster than our brain could actually read them as individual images. And something called persistence of vision is something our brain does to actually blur these individual frames together, so we don't actually see the individual ones. So we're working at a frame rate faster than our brains can actually determine them as individual images. Okay? There was once upon a time in the early days of cinema, they actually used to nickname it the flicks, because the frame rate was much slower, and so the shutter coming down would block the light, and so the projection would actually flicker. The light would flicker because the shutter is moving down. Okay, and so when television happened, the images don't happen with frames, it's actually lines of pixels, and they would work from two sides and draw the image top to bottom. Okay, 25 frames per second is the rate there. Before digital TV, if you we're going to do something like, I remember doing some assignments for university, and I was just taking photos of a paused video for images. You actually had to have the frame speed, the shutter speed on your camera at a slower speed. Otherwise, you would only have half the image appear if you're just shooting at 1/125th of a second. So you'd have to set it at like 1/60th of a second or something like that with the tripod. So you'd only get half the image. And so that, I don't know if digital TV is like that anymore. But anyway, it's good to know. All right, so these top three are the only ones we need to use. 25 frames per second is what we'll use. With that in mind, we're dealing with seconds and half seconds. So I spoke about this last semester. Half a second is a good building block, a standard thing to use, okay? Mainly because when we start bringing things like music into the piece, we start synchronizing image to sound. A beat is half a second. Okay, so if you use seconds and half seconds for your durations, as well as your pauses and movements, it will synchronize beautifully to music. Okay, so it's just a good standard to use, and we'll be doing that. We'll be bringing audio files into that. With our durations in After Effects, there's some shortcuts that we can use. There will be shortcuts. So if I've just triple clicked on the duration and I'm just typing in 3000 and I'm hitting the tab key, that's 30 seconds. So if I did 1000, 10 seconds. Okay, so it's a good shortcut that we use. We'll also use that in the timeline as well. Okay, so for the purposes of what we're doing, just 30 seconds is fine. Our background color. So think about hex codes. Okay, everything that you do with your style guides, whatever brands you're doing, hex codes are the colors that we'll use. Okay, so that's quite handy. And that becomes quite important in a brand identity, using the specific colors. And so whatever you do a style guide, CMYK, RGB and hex code. Okay. For the purposes of what we're doing, I'm just going to do white, F, 6 characters. Again, just so we can see what we're doing. All right. So let's just have a look at, now, please understand the luxury that we have using After Effects on a large screen. Okay, if you're using After Effects on a smaller laptop, a 12-inch laptop or something, there's going to be not as much information there. Okay, so it'll just be a bit handier with what we're doing. Little shortcuts. So we've got our frame window, our comp window, whatever we're creating, we see here. In the comp window, I'm just going to the bottom left and just use fit. And so that way, when I start making more space, let's just say I need more room in my timeline for work. So one of the traps, I'm just going Command +++ to zoom in, is to actually not see the full frame. Okay, and if you get a rude shock where you've worked away, set everything up, and there's all this extra space around. So just remember to always be looking, okay? So I'm just setting this to the small screen. So our project window, so much like something like Premiere, if you've used it, we bring in our assets, video files, Illustrator files, Photoshop files, audio files, everything comes into here. We can drag and drop, we'll bring that in a bit later. We're not worrying about it too much at the moment because we're just going to start with creating animated content within After Effects, and we'll bring in that logo a bit later. Our comp window, and then over here are the properties. Okay, and so we'll be getting into these a lot more, but like all of the Adobe programs that you've been using, all of the panels exist in this window drop-down menu, okay? So that's quite handy. We'll be getting into things like effects and presets pretty soon, okay? We have our timeline. So down the bottom, we can actually zoom in on time, okay? And we can also see the full project. So if we're doing something quite large, like a 3-minute music video or something, we don't need to see the full 3 minutes while we're working, so we might tend to zoom in. When we create content for animation, it's important to know that After Effects actually has different layers for different things, okay? We're just going to be bringing in, creating a shape layer when we first start. It's a default. Next week, we'll be getting into text a lot more. But know that After Effects has 3D capability. We can have a camera. And when I say a camera, generally speaking, it's a 35 millimeter camera, which is the cinema camera, or the old, well, your digital SLR is usually a 35 mil size. We can also have lights. We can animate lights. We can animate cameras. We can have a fly through with a camera flying through 3-dimensional space. There's some stuff to deal with down there. We also have 3D. Now, just while we're here, the latest update of After Effects has our 2D shapes, but it also has 3D. So when we talk about 3D, we're talking about what we call primitive objects. A sphere, a cube, a cylinder, a cone, a torus, which is a donut shape, are the standard primitive shapes. Now, we won't be dealing with that right now, but know that 3D is there. Having actually taught 3D at university, I was teaching 3D at UTS 30 years ago. The department that I was working at, the design, architecture and building, had graphic designers, also called Viscom, interior designers, fashion designers, and product designers. Okay. Now, product design, interior design, fashion design are essentially three-dimensional fields of design. Choral graphic design is essentially 2D. So when I was teaching 3D, what group had the biggest trouble? The graphic designers, because they couldn't conceive 3 dimensions. Okay, because all they'd ever done, drawings and graphics and photos. So if you've done sculpting or building things, fashion design, you've actually got a 3-dimensional sensibility in your head. For the graphic designers who haven't, well, we're going to be building brand new motor neuron pathways in your brain which have 3-dimensional capabilities. Okay, there'll be a learning curve and there may be some tears. We'll get there. We'll deal with 3D down the track. Okay, we will touch upon it over the course of this term. Okay, we'll touch upon it, but we won't really spend a lot of time there. Advanced diploma definitely does use a lot of 3D in After Effects. Okay, so it's a big deep dive there. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a shape layer. There it is. So this layer has no content as yet. Okay, so let's create some content. Now, what I'll do, so I've just got a rectangle. I'll do that. Now, if I don't want a stroke on it, just click on the word stroke and take the stroke off. Okay, or vice versa, if you wanted an outline, a shape, which was stroke with no fill, you'd do the opposite. So just for the sake of what we're doing, now I'm just going to make a square. Now I'm deliberately just making the square just to the left of the comp, okay? Mainly because we're going to deal with some stuff. Okay, so what we have now, and if we have a look in our layer, in our timeline, we actually have content. Now, last semester when we brought in an Illustrator file, which was our web banner, you didn't have this stuff, okay? And so what you had was essentially the basic transform properties. So in transform properties, position, scale, rotation, opacity, okay? We won't explain those in detail, but what you'll also note is wherever you see this stopwatch icon means that it can be animated, and we set keyframes before we actually start the animation. Okay, so we'll get there in a minute, but also know that we're now unpacking this shape that we've created, and suddenly we have more possibilities. Again, with this stopwatch icon, which means they can be animated, so we can animate color. Okay. We can animate the stroke. There'll be all those sorts of things that we can do. Don't worry about it. We're just doing the basics at the moment, but we will be. Okay. Now, let's just start talking about shortcuts. And the shortcuts are going to relate to position, scale, rotation, and opacity. So I might have mentioned this last semester. If I hit the P key, I bring up position. If I hit the S key, I've got scale. R key, rotation. Okay. Opacity, now I don't know why it must just be an American thing. Opacity is not O. It's T for transparency. Okay, so if I hit T, there's our opacity. Okay. So that's just a handy thing to do. I'm just going to animate position to start with. Now, before I do anything, and this is really, really, really important. Okay, so everyone just look at the screen, or look at your screen. What we have, now I'm moving over to the selection tool, the arrow, okay? So whenever we're doing something like Illustrator, like InDesign, we go to there, okay? Probably the V shortcut, I imagine, much like the old ones. Now, just have a look at this, because this is important. This little marker, which by default has set up in the center of the comp. That's the anchor point. Okay? The anchor point is really important. Okay, and we set that first. Now, I'm just for the sake of this, I'm just hitting the R key for rotation. Okay, so just watch this. I'm just going to scroll here. The anchor point is the pivot point of which it's rotating. Okay, so that needs to be thought about before we do anything. Okay, and so what we do, I'll do the long way around. There is a shortcut. Layer, transform, center anchor point in layer content. Okay, so that's pretty important to set, because we have to set it before we create any keyframes. Okay, that really does set up a can of worms if we don't do that at the start. So doing that, if I rotate now, it's in the exact center. So if this was a circle and we wanted it to act like a wheel, or we wanted type to rotate in a perfect circle rather than wobbling around like a clown at a circus's bicycle, we need to set that. Now, you will not set it by eye. Here is the anchor point tool, okay, just to the left of the rectangle or the shape tool. So this is important. So just watch this. I've just reset it. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm moving the anchor point to point. Okay. Now what that does, now let's just hit scale. I'm going to unlink the width and the height. Okay, X and Y. So we've got axes. So whenever we're designing, we've got our X-axis, our Y-axis. And if we go 3D, we have a Z-axis too. Okay, we'll do that. Now, I've just unlinked it only so that I'm scrolling the horizontal. And notice it's actually the anchor point is the reference point for that scale. There,
Yeah,
I zoomed in and moved it by a line. Yeah. So if I use the, okay, so that's important. And when we start getting into text and we're animating things like the tracking, then we can have the tracking animating from the center. Very beautiful to watch. Okay, so that anchor point is quite important. Okay, so just know that you can move it and that becomes something to do. So for the sake of what I'm doing right now, I'm not worrying too much about having it in a particular place, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to animate the position. Okay, and I'm going to do this because we're going to go further than we did last semester now, okay? So just remember, we've got our time marker in the timeline, okay? Wherever this is where keyframes will be created. So the position of this is very important, okay? And let's just bring us into a little handy default way of thinking. Half a second is 12 frames. Okay. Half of 25 is 12 and a half, but there's no such thing as half a frame. Never begin animation at frame 1. Okay, always allow the audience time to register what is there, a blank screen, before things happen. Okay, that could be half a second, it could be a second. You think about it. Okay, but always at the minimal start half a second in. And half a second is actually quite a length of time. Okay, so I've positioned it. Now, what I could do is I can triple click in the timeline in the actual numbers and actually just type in 12, hit the tab key, and that will set. So if I just set this at 25, there's 1 second. Okay. If I set this at 200, there's 2 seconds. Okay, so it's really important because After Effects is unforgiving for wherever keyframes are created. Okay, so you just keep things simple. And when we start getting into it, we'll have the timeline. I think we might have started with that last semester, where we actually start planning when things happen. Seconds and half seconds is a really handy thing to do. When you become a creative director and you have a team working for you, you'll set your timeline up, everything happening at key moments on seconds and half seconds, you'll give them to create, and then from there you can adjust and refine. Okay? So get into the habit of planning. So I'm just going to half a second in. to begin the animation, I click the stopwatch. And so by default, a keyframe has been created. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm just going to move to say, I'm going to do 3 seconds, so 300. Now, what I have done is I've moved the time marker before I have adjusted anything, because any change that I do now, and let's just say I'm going to move this to the other side of the screen of the comp, it's automatically created a keyframe. Okay. Now, keyframes are punctuation points. Okay? They're like the capital letter at the beginning of a sentence, the full stop at the end of a sentence, and if we wanted a pause or a thing, we might want I'm going to have this stop. I want to pause here. So I've moved my marker and I want to create a keyframe. But it won't automatically create a keyframe because I haven't done anything. So to add a keyframe where there's no change, way over here at the left, there's a little hollow diamond or a 45-degree angled square. I click that and I've added a keyframe. Okay. And what I might do is, so what was that? That's 2.5 seconds. Yep. So 2.5. So I'll go to 6.5 seconds. I'll try and do it here. Okay, all I've done is I've moved it by eye. I could have done it quicker this way. Now, here's a handy thing. All right. What I want to do is I actually want this shape to actually return to whence it started. Okay. Now, I could move it in place. I could get my rulers up, Command R, and create a guide there. That can be handy at times. But all I'm going to do, watch this, I'm going to highlight that first keyframe, which is the starting point, edit, copy, edit, paste. So I've just pasted it. I've pasted the keyframe. Okay. I wanted to go further. I'll go forward 0.5 seconds. I'll just put a pause there. Okay. That looks like I had half. That's a full second, isn't it? What's that? That goes from 3 to 4. Okay. Very handy. What I can do is I'll go to here. I'm holding down the shift key and the keyframe will lock onto my time marker. So that's handy. Now, let's just say I wanted to repeat this. Watching. So I'm highlighting all of those keyframes. And what I'll do is, where was I? I was in a while. There we go. I've just pasted a lot of the keyframes into a position. So just hit my Okay. And if I wanted, I could highlight them all again and paste them all again. Okay. So we can copy and paste keyframes. Now, what you'll also find, handy hint, I can actually copy and paste keyframes from one layer onto another layer. Okay, we'll get there down the track. Now, I'm actually going to undo a bit of this. I'm going back to the first. All right. Now, what we have, now this is where we start getting into a refined level of animation, okay? And what I'm about to do and what I'm about to show you is something that you will definitely bring into your animation, okay? If I do this, that's very mechanical, okay? The actual animation is the same from beginning to end. It stops hard, starts hard, okay? That's fine. But we start getting to a level of sensitivity to animation by actually bringing in something a little bit more organic into the speed. And when I say organic, we're actually starting to bring in the laws of physics into animation. So when I say the laws of physics, I've got things like gravity. If I have something high and I drop it, sorry about that for emphasis, it speeds up, it accelerates. Okay, so acceleration is a law of physics. Okay, if I stand here and I run to the door, I will get faster and faster the further I go. So acceleration is a natural, organic thing. So things like gravity and acceleration and deceleration are things that we bring into this. Now, so everyone just watch this. Note that I have highlighted the keyframes because this is what I want to look at. And I'm bringing in a new level of adjustment. And here is I actually have what's called the graph editor. See that? So I have animated only the horizontal element. Okay, there's no change to the vertical. The graph editor is this little button to the top left of that. Okay, now there's a code here. It's a very handy code to have. So, and it works better if I say this with an American accent. Okay, so we have X, Y, Z, not Z, X, Y, Z, R, G, B. X is red, Y is green, Z is blue. Okay, so when we get into 3D, you'll see that. So you can see that the color coding is purely based on the horizontal. Okay, and this acceleration is uniform and it stops. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create what is called and easy ease. Okay, it's just what we use in After Effects. Now, so everyone just watch this. I'm highlighting the keyframes. I right click or control click on the timeline. And I have, oh, actually, hang on. Silly me, it's been a while. Highlight the keyframes. Control click on the keyframes. And I have this keyframe assistant. And I have easy ease. Okay. If you start getting into your F keys, then there's a whole lot of other shortcuts that'll appear. So just watch this. Okay. So easy ease, always use easy ease. You'll notice there's an easy ease in and an easy ease out. That means it can start slow and stop quickly. Say, for example, if I threw a tennis ball at a wall, it wouldn't slow down before it reached the wall. It would hit at speed. Okay, if I dropped something onto the ground, it wouldn't slow down. Okay, so now I've just easy eased, and note that our keyframes have changed from little diamond shapes to sort of like a X-y sort of shape. Okay. Now, watch this. Let's have a look at our graph editor. Notice the change in the graph editor now. Okay. We have a look. It's started slow. The higher the slope, the faster it's moving. And then it evens out again. So that's a classic easy ease. Okay. So let's just have a look at that. There'll be a slight difference. Let's have a look at it. See that? Okay. A bit easier there. Now we can push that further. Now, if I wanted to, if I want to make, here's a little handy hint. That's too slow. I actually want to see this work much better. So what I might do is I'm actually going to speed this up. So what I'll do is I'm just going to highlight all of my keyframes. Hold down the Option key. Now watch this. Watch the keyframes. Notice that they're all adjusting in relation to each other. Okay? So okay, let's just say I want this to happen in 5 seconds. Probably easier to go to 5 seconds and Option click there. Okay? So let's have a look at it now. Okay, so you do see that easy ease a little bit more now. All good? Let's say we want to push it a little further. Okay, now we can. Now what we can do, remember we're using a program like Illustrator, we have anchor points and we have handlebars. Watch this. I haven't got handlebars. I'm going to have to do something. Okay, now what I do is I need to separate my dimensions. So I'll just come over here to where it says position, hold my control key down, and we can now see separate dimensions. Okay, now I've control clicked on the word position. If you're doing something like scale, it might actually, you might not need to separate them, but If I do that, okay, it's actually done this again. Let's just come up here. I'll just ease it again. And now watch this. Now I have handlebars. Okay, so now if I push my handlebars, we can play with this and adjust it until the cows come home. So we can spend too much time adjusting our handlebars, Martha. Far too much time. Yep.
Get the X5.
I clicked in here and I went shift clicked and said separate dimensions. Okay. That was the option key. Yeah. Okay, so now let's have a look at it. Ready? Here we go. Whoa. Whoa. How's that? So that's very pleasant to the eye. Okay. We like to, this is something of which it gives our eyes an ease. It's not hard and fast. Okay. Now, just for the sake of it, I'll push this a little further and we'll see what happens. Yep, go on.
When I fully
yeah, all I did was I just highlighted again and then eased it again. Yeah. That's all right. No, this is the time. I'm spending time doing this because it's actually changes your way of thinking. Okay, and so it's going to be something that we'll yes. Yeah, it's done that again. So let's just zoom in. So all I do is highlight. Okay, so everyone just watch. Okay, I'm going to take this one step further. Okay, so let's just have a look at what we've created. Just hit the space bar. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, so everyone just watch this. Okay. Now there will be times when this is useful. Most times it won't be. Okay. So watch this. There's also the overshoot. Okay. If I'm running at speed and I try and stop on a mark, I'll probably go too far and come back. So there's a cushion. So what I could do, watching, I'm going into, now we can go too far with this. So just watch what I've done. First of all, look what I've done. Note that we've got this. So watch what happens. It cushioned back. Okay. Now we can go a bit too far with that, but it's just a handy little thing. Sometimes just a little cushion just adds that little bit of visual satisfaction. We can go too far. We can do it. All right. And So of course I can copy and paste these frames, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm going to do one more thing. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do, who has, so I've got delved back into some filmmaking. Okay, probably about 10 years ago-ish, Peter Jackson did The Hobbit, part 1 and 2. But he did something quite different to the regular filmmaking. He shot at a higher frames per second rate. He actually shot at 60 frames per second. And so what happened was it just looked wrong. It looked too clean, it looked too antiseptic, because our brain, our persistent division, was reading it wrong. Now, if you videotape someone, if you videoed someone running, or you're in a car running, driving fast, and you pause it, quite often the person will be blurred or the car will be blurred. Okay? That blur is something that, again, our brain sort of needs. And so if you look at 2D animation, individual frames, they'll quite often put a blur with a fast movement and or multiple frames. When I used to shoot stop motion animation, like plasticine puppets, and we had them moving, quite often what we do just before we shot the frame was we just bump the table or knock it so it blurred, sort of go motion. Okay? So you sort of can build this in, but After Effects actually does have this as a build. And what we have is this button here called motion blur. Okay? It's sort of 3 little circles overlapping. Can you see that? So what I've done is I've added a motion blur to it. So now let's have a look and see how that's moved. See the blur? Yeah. So that, again, in terms of our perception, is something that just adds a little more sensibility to it. So quite often I won't worry about it. You know, if I'm doing logos and things, I don't need motion blurs and things, but sometimes it does work. But just to know that we have a button here. Now, while we're at it, and we won't do it, but let's just continue our tour before we have our break. So while we're here, what we have, so just look at this. Again, you won't need to use them that often, but you can. Adjustment layers, things like blend modes and things we can put onto layers, and layers adjusting and working with layers. So much like Photoshop, After Effects is like Photoshop, but on massive performance enhancing drugs. Okay, it is huge, it is deep. And the other thing we have here, so let's just watch this, a little cube, this is a 3D layer. Now, I'm not going to do it, but if I will do it, but you don't need to do it. I've just added a Z axis to this. Okay? And just so that you know where we're heading, what we're doing is when we look at, again, if we're just flat 2D graphic designers, we're just used to seeing things from a flat angle, okay? Sort of like an elevation or an architect's plan of a house. We see it from the front, we see it from the top, we see it from the right, the left, the orthographic plan, okay? What we have in After Effects is the ability to look at, I'm looking at this frame and I'm going to look at it from the top. This comp window, I'm looking at it from the front. So I'm looking at that flat 2D shape on the left from the top. Okay? So I could, again, have this in 3D. I don't need to if it's just 2D. Most branding, most logos are just 2D, but just know that's it. Does that make sense? We're looking at that shape from the top. Okay? Yeah. So, yeah, look at that. There's our motion blur halfway through. Okay, so I don't need to, I'm just going to take the 2D off, but there we have it. All right. So what we've done, we've got 3 minutes. Okay, let's just make these 3 minutes count. Little shortcut, the U key. The U key shows me only those layers with keyframes in them. Okay, so that's handy. Now, everyone watching, I'm going to duplicate this layer. Okay, now this layer, edit, duplicate, Command D. I now have 2 of them. Okay. Let's have a look at, well, let's just go in and adjust the contents of one of those rectangles. Let's just change color. So let's just say we'll make this one blue, just for the sake of it. Now, everyone just look at this. It's actually showing me that there are keyframes, but I can't actually access them. Okay? That is why I tap the U key. That shows me the actual, the little dot shows me that there are keyframes in that layer. I'd have to dig to find out where they are. But the U key shows me quickly where they are. And that will save you a lot of space in your timeline when you start having lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of layers. Okay? Now, what I might do is I'm highlighting all of these keyframes, and I'm just going to move them in time. Doesn't matter where. Okay. All right. So what I have is I can duplicate content with animation and do it. Now, I will say, just before we have our break, that if I wanted to actually move this top layer down, let's just say I'm doing that. I've already created animation on the position, and so it hasn't moved all of them at once. Okay, I have to do something else to that. Okay, actually, while we're at it, and I may, let's just see if I can do it quickly. We're about to have a break. No, we won't. We won't, because I'm knowing that I have flooded your brains already.
That last piece of it.
Well, what happened was, because I've already animated the position, okay, what it means is I can't, well, actually, let's see if I probably can. I've highlighted, because I've actually separated the dimensions. Okay, that's separate dimensions. I've never actually done that before.
So the duplication doesn't layer of transformation.
It duplicates everything in it. But if I just moved it down, it would only move, see where that marker is? It would only move the position there. I can't, it's not moving all of them at once. But what I did was, I actually have the separate dimensions. I can actually move all of these keyframes. The y-axis has all been moved uniformly. Okay, that's really, honestly, in all the years I've been using After Effects, I've never actually separated the dimensions for that reason. I've always done something else. Well, let's just say if I had stars moving across the sky, I could have hundreds of stars in different positions, all doing the same thing.
Just one of the like one of the axes of one of the layers. Do you understand what I?
Yeah. I would have to do it via here though, via the Y axis with them all highlighted. Because if I, okay. All right. So at this point, let's go and have a break. Okay. I think I'll just save this. Of course, remember to save things. And we will stop things there.